Welcome everybody to our second lesson in the evolution unit. Today we are still going to be on topic one, which is the idea that populations change over time. But today specifically we're going to focus on speciation. So before we dive in, we're going to hit some vocabulary words. So the first word that I want to hit is biological fitness. All right, now I'm not talking about fitness like working out. In biology, our fitness is the ability for an organism, an individual to survive up to reproductive age, find a mate, and produce offspring or have babies. So here we have two birds, right? This bird right here was able to have two offspring or two babies, two children. And the children were then able to have two children of their own. So this individual was able to pass his DNA, his genes, on to six individuals, which isn't that many in the population. Whereas if we compare it to this guy right here, this individual was able to have twice as many offspring. And those offspring were also able to have twice as many offspring. So this individual's genes or DNA has been passed on to a lot of individuals. So we say that it has a high fitness. It was able to produce a lot of offspring. Okay, well, what are offspring? I keep using this word. Well, offspring are babies or the young born of living organisms. So we can have offspring produced by a single organism. So we just finished our unit on cell division, right? So here's a cell dividing. And this would be that case where we have a single cell that is dividing. It's able to asexually reproduce or have offspring. However, we also have sexual reproduction where we can have two organisms or two parents that produce an offspring, like these cute little guys right here. So what is the end game of, every living thing? The end game is to have babies, to have, that high fitness, to pass on their DNA to their children and then their children and the children's children, right? To have more and more babies. So that's the end game. And let's talk about why the earth isn't then covered in tons and tons of babies or tons and tons of, why isn't it out of control? Well, there are environmental pressures. So this is pressure or things that keep those populations in check. Some examples are like the amount of food and water, competition, predators, if there are predators around, and if there's just enough habitat, enough space for organisms to live. So these environmental pressures can really affect a population. They might cause there to be, more babies born or more reproduction or less reproduction. So the environment, plays a big role. So here we've got an example. We've got a fox and we've got rabbits. And so in this scenario here, our prey are the rabbits. And you can see as the prey population goes up and up and up, the fox population, the predator, the blue line, also goes up. And you can see there's a little bit of a lag. First, the prey goes up, then the predator. But at a certain point, there are so many predators, so many foxes that they eat up all the rabbits, and that are a lot of the rabbit population. And that causes that population to crash. So then there isn't enough food for the predators, and then their population goes down. And you can see it's kind of a cycle, an up and down cycle, but the environment really has an impact on, how big or how small the population is and how much they're reproducing. So if a population is not able to respond to environmental pressures, is not able to handle there not being enough habitat or enough food or water, well, that's going to cause that population, that species to go extinct. So what's extinction? Extinction is the disappearance of a species when the last of its members dies. And here we have two examples of animals that have gone extinct. This is the thylacine. The thylacine, it looks a lot like a dog, but it's actually a marsupial, so it's more closely related to like a kangaroo. And these lived in Australia, and they, went extinct because they couldn't, really handle or they couldn't cope with humans being in their areas, taking up their habitat, preying on them. So that's the thylacine. And then here we also have the dodo bird. Similar story, humans involved here, where we have, just can't adapt, don't have the traits to handle us being in their, competing with them or in their area, really. Okay, so our, organisms, they have strategies. They are, strategies for reproduction. So we have two categories of, ways that organisms reproduce. All right. So we are going to go through some examples. We're going to go through, details about the offspring that they have, the type of environments that they live in, and then also their lifespan. How long do they live? So we've got two categories here. We've got the R strategists, that's what they're called. And some examples are a mouse or like a locust, the insect. So we got a little mouse. And their strategy is to have as many offspring as they just have lots and lots of offsprings at one time. So just tons and tons of offspring. And they don't use a lot of energy to have these babies. And they do it fast. So like mice, they can churn out a litter of babies and then turn around and do it again and again and again and again very quickly. These guys do really well in unstable environments. So environments where, there's a lot of change in the biotic and abiotic things in the ecosystem, the food, the weather, whatever it may be, it's not stable. These guys are able to do okay because they just produce a lot of babies, and if the babies die, well, then they just produce a whole bunch more. And they, the trade-off here is that their lifespan is short. They are not around very long. They do a lot and do it really fast. So those are our strategists. All right, our other category of, our reproductive strategies is K strategists. Some examples are us. We humans are K strategists, so are elephants. And our strategy or K strategists is to have few offspring, so not so many. And we spend a lot of energy and a lot of time and resources to have these babies, to produce offspring, and it happens slowly. It doesn't, it takes a long time for you to grow up and reach maturity, right? So these are going to be found in environments that are very stable, that are predictable, and they're going to have long lifespans, going to live for a long time. So these are just two different strategies that you find, or patterns that we see in reproduction. Okay, so remember last lesson we learned about variation. Remember, variation is the differences between individuals in a species. That's why we don't all look alike. You can see here these snails, they're all the same species, but they don't look exactly alike. So this variation plays a big role, in whether, the reproduction happens quickly or whether it happens slowly. And so variation within populations can sometimes happen really quickly, and because of a strong selective pressure. There's something in the environment that is pushing these variations to arise and be useful. All right, so that's a strong selective pressure. There's something in the environment, there's some change that's pressuring and favoring different variations. Okay, and then we also have, gradual change. So these can happen, that means slowly. And so the unequal fitness of individuals, remember those two birds we were looking at? It wasn't equal. One was able to have way more offspring. That leads to a gradual change in the population, generation after generation, over many generations. So that's a little bit more slower of a change that we see in the variation. So where is the variation? It's a throwback or a reminder. Where do we find it? It's in the genes. So all of these birds, these are finches. So Darwin is a scientist, naturalist, who worked on the theory of evolution, credited with most of the theory of evolution. He made a lot of observations and he looked at a lot of finches, and you can see these all look a little bit different. Their beaks, their body shapes, their head, and he didn't know this, but it is because of their DNA. It's inside their genes. Throwback to last unit where we learned all those organelles. So here we've got some ribosomes that are in different organisms. And you can see they look very similar, but they are all a little bit different. And that's because there's differences in the code of the DNA. The DNA is slightly different, making them look slightly different. All right, so the whole goal of this conversation is speciation, right? That's where we're trying to go. So the emergence of new species happens when a line or a lineage of a species splits into different groups that can no longer interbreed, so they can't have babies together that can then have babies, or they can't produce fertile offspring, so their babies cannot have babies. That means, or they're no longer genetically aligned. So that's when we have a new species, where we have, a line that, a genetic line, and if they split, the populations become so different that they cannot come back together and interbreed. And so here we've got kind of a cool picture of some more of those finches. And so here in the middle, we've got the ancestor. So number 1 is the ancestor of all of these in this diagram. So they all, originated, or they all came from this one ancestor. And over time, they got more and more different. You can see they've been kind of categorized by what they eat. So these are seed eaters, bark pickers. They got all kinds of different names here, right? And so, they all look different because the environment or the food source is different. And that has favored certain variations. Certain beaks were better at getting whatever food they needed to. And over time, the DNA became more and more different in the different populations. And now they can't interbreed anymore. They are separate species. Oops. Okay, so how fast does this happen? Can species just appear overnight? Well, we have 2 categories here. So speciation can happen slowly. This is called gradualism. It's like gradual, that kind of means slowly over time. And this is when, we've got a species and there's just little changes, slowly over time. You can see here in this V. Now, another way that speciation can happen is punctuated equilibrium. And this is, bursts or episodes of speciation that happen suddenly, and then long periods where not a lot of change happens in the species. So here we've got our original green guy, and you can see, there's been some change in the environment, or there's some strong environmental pressure that has favored the orange butterfly. And you can see it didn't change a lot over time. Here you can see the species of the green butterfly, still living along, but maybe there's some other environmental pressure in the population that favors different traits. And then over time, we get this new species. And in the end, they cannot interbreed. They cannot have fertile offspring or babies that can have more babies. So we've got 2 different ways that speciation can happen, or new species can emerge. And here we've got an example of, how evolution happens. It's happening right now in our environments. So antibiotics, you might have heard of, antibiotics before, medicines that your doctor gives you. They're meant to kill bacteria, antibiotics. So they're for bacteria. And so in a population of bacteria, there's going to be lots of germs, okay? But some are going to be drug resistant. So here we've got the orange guys, they're normal bacteria. If you get an antibiotic, they're gonna die, but this blue guy, he's gonna be fine. It doesn't affect him at all. And so what happens is when you take an antibiotic, or when an antibiotic is given, it kills off all the bacteria that, can get killed on it, but it doesn't kill the resistant bacteria. And now in the environment, there's lots of resources, there's no competition, and those resistant bacteria are able to multiply. They're able to take over. And so that's how we get more and more antibiotic resistant bacteria. The bacteria also sometimes are able to swap their DNA, and so they can give sometimes the code, oh, this is how you beat that antibiotic. They can give it to other bacteria, so this resistance can spread even more. So, here we've got a strong environmental pressure that kills most of the bacteria, and except, our resistant bacteria, and then it's able to take over. If you're really interested in that or want to hear more about, how bacteria can rapidly speciate, or more species of bacteria can arise, I definitely invite you to visit tinyurl.com/EvoABR for antibiotic resistance. So check out that video. It's pretty cool. All right, here's some of the key vocab from our lesson for today, and have a great day, everybody. Bye.